Today's topic is on ladybird deeds, a common thing in the elder law world, but I thought a lot of people wonder, first of all, what is a ladybird deed? Does it come from Lady Bird Johnson? Actually, the answer is no. It's based on an attorney who gave a class in which he had a fictional character named Ladybird. Anyway, it stuck. A ladybird deed is an enhanced life estate deed. What's the difference? If you just have a life estate deed, it says, I deed to whomever upon my death this property. Well, the beneficiaries may have what's called a remainder interest, which means they have an interest immediately. And so if you were to sell that property without it being enhanced, then you would have to get the consent of the remainder beneficiaries. On the other hand, an enhanced life estate deed is a deed actually subject to divestment. Now, why would we do this? First of all, what would that mean? The enhanced portion means that I could sell, lease, mortgage the property, and even change my mind on who the beneficiary is before I die without anybody else's consent. So what's the purpose? Why do we have the ladybird deed? Well, first of all, it avoids probate. So in other words, it wouldn't go by your will, or it wouldn't go by laws of intestacy. The property would go by your deed. So that may be beneficial for several reasons. First of all, you don't have, if the only asset was your property, your home, let's say, it wouldn't have any adverse tax consequences. In other words, if you were over 65, you still get the over 65 and homestead exemption. If you were disabled, it wouldn't lose that exemption. If you kept the property until you die, you get a recalculation of the basis, the values, the date of death. In other words, if I bought a home for $100,000, it was worth $300,000 when I die. Whoever gets the property when I die would only pay capital gains tax on any appreciation after the $300,000. And that would be even, of course, if it was a surviving spouse, there would even be an additional $250,000 gain after the first spouse to die without there being capital gains taxes. Well, in any event, an enhanced life estate deed is cheaper than doing a will or a trust. That's another advantage. So you don't change property taxes. You get a recalculation of the basis, the values, the date of death. And also it's most often used, or very often used, if you're applying for long-term care Medicaid and some of the other Medicaid programs as well. There's 109 Medicaid programs in Texas, and they each have their own rules. So the state has a right to make a claim against the home after death for reimbursement to the extent that they paid out benefits, typically if somebody's in a nursing home or if they're getting care at home. Now that may be not true on the other Medicaid programs, so it really just varies by program. But in any event, the whole idea is that the state goes after things. If it went by your will, or if you didn't have a will at all, it goes by laws of intestacy, the state's law. In other words, the state says how things go after you die. If I have a surviving spouse, well, it depends if I had children from a prior relationship or not. If I did, then it might be split. If I had no deed or no will, then it might be split between the surviving children or their descendants, as well as the surviving spouse. Whereas if all the children are born in the same marriage, under laws of intestacy, it would go to the surviving spouse. So that's important too when you do a ladybird deed, because if you do have children from a prior marriage, then you may end up having to still probate after the first one dies, because otherwise it didn't get all that interest to the surviving spouse. So it really depends. You have to look at the factual situation when you do a ladybird deed. But most commonly they're done to not only avoid probate, but also to avoid Medicaid estate recovery. Because under Texas law, the state has a right to make a claim against the home to the extent that Medicaid benefits have been advanced. With a ladybird deed, since you're in control of the property, and you haven't given it up until you die, it's not subject to the 5-year look-back period, or at least there would be no transfer penalty. And since it avoids probate or intestacy, it avoids a successful claim by the state. There's probably a lot more to talk about on ladybird deeds, but I think I'll leave that for another show. I hope that this has given you a little bit of an education on how we use ladybird deeds in many ways, by the way. It couldn't just be to individuals. Sometimes it's to a trust for various reasons. But I think we'll leave it at that for today. Thank you for joining.